Hi, this is Sue Field from Health Force Minnesota. And we're excited to have our webinar today with setting the stage for success as a facilitator. We have Eileen Royal, who serves as a learning resource laboratory and simulation coordinator within the School of Nursing at Minnesota State University in Mankato, Minnesota. Following her expertise in simulation and family nursing both nationally and internationally. A member of the 2016 MnSHEP Leadership Development Program for simulation educators for that particular cohort. Rosalie is the other presenter, faculty member at Century College in White Bear Lake, Minnesota, which is part of Minnesota Alliance for Nursing Education. She has 8 years of experience in simulation and has given presentations on simulations at the local and state level. She's a member of the 2016 MnSHEP Leadership Development Program for Simulation Educators cohort. And Rose is currently researching the merits of having a statewide simulation for educators and industry partners as well. We're excited to have both of them with us this morning. We're recording this particular session so that it can be archived and people can view it at a later date. Presentation, as you come in, you're automatically put on mute. There is a chat area down below, and if you have questions during the presentation, please put them into the chat area, and we'll ask those questions to either Rose or Colleen during our presentation. Before we start, I do want to show you where you can get a handout for today's presentation. And go to our healthforceminnesota.org website. That's forceminnesota.org. To the curriculum button, and at the bottom of that is the simulation curriculum. So go to www.healthforceminnesota.org, the curriculum tab, and the simulation curriculum. To get in there, there is a link here to a website. I also want you to notice that we now have a click to join the listserv. So if you are not on the listserv, or if you know somebody who would like to be our listserv and get information on when we have these webinars, please send them to this site and they can just click on that and fill out the information and we'll get them on the listserv. Our Minnesota MnSHEP website, for a password. The password to get into that is simulation with a capital S. So that's simulation with a capital S, all lowercase otherwise. If you go over to the left under the newsletters and webinars. Over to the newsletters and webinars, we've got newsletters from this past year. And going down on that page, we have the webinars for this year, and this is Set the Stage for Success as a Facilitator. The handout for the presentation is right here. It's in a PDF form, and the 2 slides per page. So if you want to print that out, you have that available to you. What I would just like to mention and show you up on our website is that please be sure to come up and take a look at all the different simulations we have on our simulation site. We have them according to either the medical model or concept model, and have a lot of different simulations that you can use that are open for your program. So, you know, we have a lot of different resources up there. The thing that I would like to mention to you is that we are planning a simulation workshop on May 17th and 18th cities, and it looks like we will most likely have a national speaker for that. And it's going to be a really wonderful opportunity as the Board of Nursing is changing the rules for simulation within Minnesota. We'll be able to reference those. We'll be able to listen to the national speaker and kind of find out what are those best standards for simulation at a 2-day workshop. I'm going to give the controls over to Rita. I'm sorry, over to Ron, and then those will be able to start her presentation. Let me find, here you go. There, and you notice up on the right-hand corner of her picture, of her PowerPoint, if you hit the little arrows, it will go to full screen for you. And Rose, there is a gray box there if you want to just delete that.
Okay.
Thank you.
There we go. Great. Welcome. I'm Rose Raleigh, and I'm with Kyle. And we'll talk about setting the stage for success as a simulation facilitator. Oops. I'm having some, there we go. So objectives today, we're going to cover to explain the NACSL standards of best practice simulation as they relate to facilitation. They came out with new ones just a week or two ago, so we want to compare the pre-current and then describe 2 approaches or methods that you may use as an effective facilitator. The standards of best practice looking at the current revisions and then the previous. You can see they're pretty similar. The only thing that has changed drastically is that they combine facilitation and facilitator. We are going to go through them, how they relate to the role of the facilitator, and just give you the highlights on the changes that have occurred. This was, Colleen was talking yesterday, and this was actually timing to do this presentation because it really made me look at the standards in depth, probably more in depth than I would have otherwise, at least between the two. So it's been very helpful just thinking about next year and what I need to bring to the table for facilitating. So this one, Colleen calls this the dull book slide. We're just going to go down our list here. And the simulation design standard highlights. Again, we're just going to highlight any areas. So bad, the first version just came out last year in 2015. So there were any significant changes. However, that in mind, this is, important standards, but if you are truly new to simulation, I would start with this one, especially because it does walk you through beginning to end the key points of doing effective simulation. So even though this slide is pretty blank, it is a very, very important standard. Just the required elements, again, beginning to end. So if you're new to simulation, I would almost start with this one if you have to start from ground zero in designing a simulation. The standard itself is not. So that's outcomes and objectives, highlights on this. It is standards as a whole have become more robust. So this standard in the past just focused on objectives. And the current standard focuses on, includes outcomes with those objectives, and gives just a fantastic framework for developing objectives. In fact, I'm going to bring this to our faculty, standard to our faculty, not just as a reminder on just how to develop objectives for simulation, but objectives for any of the work that we do. With the framework, develop the SMART framework. Again, just looking at the objectives, are they specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-related? This is, I think Doran is the original author, and then the CDC modified this for healthcare, I believe. So it's just a great for developing objectives and key to design simulation as well. Interesting thing that they took away from this criteria was that they had previously had a criteria that talked about viewing the client holistically. And I went to a presentation at the NACSL conference in June, and we talked about updating the standards. And they said they really worked hard to make these standards universal, so any discipline could use them for what they were doing. And so that holistic piece wasn't going to be as universal without nursing as other disciplines would use. So it's interesting the things they took out and kept in. But again, they just really strive to make these universal. So I thought this would be, slide because it's through facilitation standards. Again, in this, but the highlights that I picked out, or the changes that I picked out from previous to current, was they suggested allowing the simulation to progress without interruption. Now the current standard is with or without interruption. So we're seeing things not go planned, and we'll talk later about queuing. How do you get things back on track? So we don't want students flailing around. So now they've included that in there that we may have to interrupt to get things back on track. The pre-standard, I on here nothing regarding facilitator. I kind of state that it was in the statement, the original statement. However, now it had moved to a criterion, a required element in criterion 1 of standards. So I think it has a little more oomph to it, but they do specify that the facilitator requires specific initial education on use of simulation through formal course work training, and participates in ongoing education offerings and or targeted work with an experienced mentor. So just some ideas there. Again, the level of specific initial initiation, but we'll talk about resources later.
Okay, so simulation debriefing standard highlights. This is a busy slide, one of many. It seems to be that they've made quite a few changes on the simulation debriefing standard. Many of them really actually just touch in some of the words, but the words that they added were highly needed. So the first, from the previous standard, it had said just simply a structured framework for debriefing needed to be used. And they've said a theoretical structured framework. So Rose and I automatically, our minds went to the heavy theory component. We'll see when we give some descriptions here. They are some of the approved, methods that we've seen, like debriefing for good judgment, debriefing for meaningful learning, PEARLS, GAS, things like that are ones that they recommend. Standard, they talked about the environment and how the environment support is conducive to learning. It supports confidentiality, trust, open communication, analysis, and reflection. And now in the new standard, they've also added feedback as something that they want us to be cognizant of in our environment, which I think we all are in our debriefing. So it was a great addition to that as well. In the previous standard, there was no mention, as Rose previously said, about the ongoing education for the debriefer. They do have to have initial education, which was added into the current standard, and then also ongoing education. So making sure that you're not just someone who has learned it on the fly, and then as we progress, certainly with any technology, we all know that it moves rapidly. That you're going to miss out on any of those advancements. So they do want you to have some type of an ongoing training. There was no mention in the previous standard on a concentrated attention of the debriefing facilitator during the simulation. This was very interesting in that many of us wear multiple hats. So play the role of the patient behind the one-way glass or behind the curtain or behind the med box, whatever we hide behind. Or we may run the cameras, the audio, the video. Basically what this now is saying is that we need to have a facilitator who can devote the concentration needed so that the attention is given to that simulation so they can have an effective debrief later. Now, Rose and I spoke about this the other day. We talked about how is that possible with a one-man show. I think it's an interesting concept for them to look at and for them to bring forth for us and helping us to get buy-in from administration, whether it be in practice or in the academic world. So I think it's a good first step in letting them know that debrief is very important and we need to have focus on that facilitator to be involved in and to be listening and making notes about things that they'd like to mention that will bring them toward those outcomes of that simulation. And then criterion 4 now in this debrief standard has really been added from the previous standard in that they're basing everything on that theoretical framework, and it needs to be structured in a purposeful manner. So that is very good for us to think about. It's, again, not that fly-by-night kind of decision process, a little more structured. It describes in the standard about the elements that we need to consider when we're choosing what type of debriefing framework we want to use. So, for instance, where the minimum phases, the objectives, the complexity of the scenario, and also the needs of the participants. And include the minimum phases of reaction, analysis, and actual simulation scenario or experience itself. The briefing standard continually kind of refers also to that new done revised standard of professional integrity and also the facilitation standard as well. So it's gotten quite a bit more robust, in my opinion, and does warrant taking a look at. And I think many of the changes in there are going to be to help us to move forward with our buy-in from our administrators. From the previous slide, I just wanted to mention also, and I think I did earlier, but again, a few of the debriefings that could be listed as standard that you would use that are theoretical in nature as well as structured would be debriefing with good judgment, PEARLS, debrief meaningful learning, and the GAS model. So there are a few different examples of what the standard considers to be theoretical structured framework.
Mm-hmm. They're listed right in there too, correct, Colleen?
There's an entire paragraph on that as well.
Okay.
For others.
Mm-hmm.
Right, simulation participant evaluation standard, the highlights. The standard only covers evaluation as a terminology, and previously it had covered assessment and evaluation. So I think there's a little bit of a play on words there in that they've chosen to have evaluation rather than assessment used throughout their standard. So criterion 1 is to determine the method of participation evaluation prior to the simulation-based experience. You do your objectives and your outcomes of the simulation to assist in this decision. In the previous standard, it was almost like they just chose to have the methods, formative, summative, and high stakes. There was no example of how do I decide or what do I use to decide which one of the types of evaluations I wanted to use. Standard, they've now put a criteria that helps you to decide which of those 3 evaluations that you'd like to use. 2 is on the formative evaluation. 2 things that are different in this is that it says it requires a formally trained facilitator and method used to facilitate teaching and learning, identify and close gaps in knowledge and skills, a readiness for real-world experiences, and support participants' clinical competencies, as well as provide ongoing formative feedback. They're saying that it should be required that that facilitator be formally trained to provide that information for the learners. Criteria is on summative evaluation. Use a discrete point or time, such as the end of the class or the midterm, the end of a course content. Stresses the fact that we need to have a safe environment for this to occur, and the learners have had to have an orientation to their space environment where the simulation will occur. If you're going to use the summative, you need to establish inter-rater reliability using more than one rater. You need to inform the participants in advance of that evaluation process that they are being evaluated. And then, of course, provide that summative feedback on whether they achieve the outcomes that you set forth for the summative evaluation or not. Criteria 4 is high-stakes evaluation. So you again at the end of a learning process. At Minnesota State University in Mankato, we were part of the NLN high-stakes project, so that many of you may be doing the evaluation right now of the videos of our students that we collected. So I want to be involved in that, but it was a conflict of interest for me to be involved as well as having my students and running the cameras. So I appreciate those of you who have taken part in that, and I look forward to finding all of the answers. Evaluation should be performed by trained, non-biased, objective evaluators who are using a comprehensive tool. So the evaluation tool should have previously been tested, and the key point here is with a similar population. So undergraduates versus graduates, nursing versus pharmacy, things like that. Their participants should have had multiple exposures already to simulation-based experiences, including evaluations prior to a high-stakes testing. So we should throw these out on a whim. They should have had some type of evaluation as well and had a little bit of experience with that. Must have predetermined parameters for terminating the scenario. So when will it actually end? When you've gotten to the point where you've transferred the patient to wherever they need to go, not telling the students that it will be in ICU to find out if they make it there or not. Possibly that would be a termination of a scenario. So you know when you may terminate the scenario if it's on the wrong way. If they've gone down a wrong road, you can't pull them back and they're too far on with use, or a major safety issue has occurred. Maybe examples of some things that you may use. You're going to tell your students that this is where we will stop the simulation. But it's for the participant evaluation standard.
This is the simulation integrity standard. Sorry. Not an active slide, but again, just some real changes in this one, particularly that the previous standard just focused on professional integrity of participants only. There was an emphasis on confidentiality, but it was basically focused on those participants. The standard talks about professional integrity for everybody involved in the simulation, whether it's the facilitator, the tech running the mannequin, the person debriefing, maybe some other faculty watching, as well as the participants. Also, the difference I noted between the previous and the current is a piece on requiring the confidentiality based policies and procedures. The required elements that talks about institutional policies and procedures for securing and destroying written documents, appropriate sharing of the participant performance, and then for feedback evaluations. but that was the stress of this new one. Century, we are lacking in this area. We don't have specific policies and procedures. We don't, at this point, have students. I think one of our faculty just started having students sign a confidentiality agreement, but next, or this upcoming semester, I will do that. Colleen, do you want to share your story about what happened at your school, why you had to quick do a confidentiality agreement?
We have the audio video recording, and so we have the capability of having a live feed into another room anywhere on campus where the remainder of the students are. In a group of 10 to 12 students, we have 4 usually in the simulation, and they were sitting with a faculty member in it, and they were watching the simulation occur. And as they were watching, we also have a peer observation evaluation form that they use that helps to get them engaged in the live feed, as well as or debrief afterwards if they want to jot down some notes. One of the students that was in the live feed decided to take a photo of live feed and place it on their Facebook page. And so that was not enough for just showing that photo. They also told the other students, not, I think, on purpose. It was something they just thought was a good idea to share because it was an interesting simulation where the baby was stolen from the hospital room of the mother for an abduction scene. And so all those things were released to the students, upcoming students, the remainder of the students in that class. As most of you know who have done anything with the scenarios, very time-consuming to alter those scenarios or write new ones so that everyone has that experience. So quickly we decided that we've always done just like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, as we all say. What happens in simulation stays in simulation, and we've talked about the amount of time that goes into the creation as well as the setting up for the very first time of all of these simulations, but it wasn't enough. So we found a confidentiality statement from a school that was kind enough to share it on the SSH site and tweaked it for our use here at Minnesota State, and began with the very student group. The remainder of those students in that course, it happened to be a pediatric course, we began with them to put the emphasis on the fact that we did other things as well, but that it was not okay to give information out, and the ramifications of it were such that we explained that. So we have now got a confidentiality statement that we have decided to implement at the beginning of every semester of our 4-semester program. And as students come in for their first scenario of their semester, they will be required to sign this confidentiality statement. On it, it has the ramifications of what will happen if they do not hold the confidentiality of those involved in simulation, the scenario itself, everything involved within that simulation. So we've just begun that, and we now have a policy as well on confidentiality that is being written into the policy and procedure book for the simulation area. So there's some there on the SSH site that they were willing to share, which you don't have to reinvent the wheel then, was great, and you can tweak it to your school or organization as well.
Can I interject, Colleen? We, at the very end, I'll show you where we do have a sample confidentiality agreement up on our MnSHEP website, as well as the possible function for a policy. So we'll show you at the very end.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask, Colleen, what are your ramifications if they follow the policy?
We'll have within each of the courses, all of our courses have simulation included in it. So from first to fourth semester, so we also have within each of those syllabi, we have what happen if the student does any type of coercion, releasing that information, and it is upon which course it is. The course that have clinical attached to it, it will include that the student would have to repeat the entire course along with the clinical aspect of it if they were found to do these type of things.
Okay. All right.
So the reality will say that it is specific to the course and found in your syllabi, but there will be ramifications of it, and that it states that it could be, no, I can't remember it exactly, but it's no grade for that participation, that there would be a decrease in their points, as well as a possibility of fail course and being take program. So it depend upon, it goes to our basic nursing program coordination committee, and then they make decisions on advancement of students when they do requests for certain aspects, if they're wanting to have someone review a process that's been put upon them. And that's what it would go to at that point to decide what the level, the faculty would have something to say about it as well. So.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Simulation Enhanced IPE Standard, the highlights. This one, again, came out, I believe it was at the same time as the design, wasn't it, Rose?
Yes, yep, 2015.
It hasn't been out very long, so obviously there are not a lot of changes on it. The first criterion is to conduct the interprofessional experience using a theoretical framework. That is the same as it was previously. Part 2 is best practices for the SIM IPE. Interesting things were added. Should be authentic, challenging, reality-based, developed and reviewed by the profession involved in the simulation. The limit is the new component of the standard, and it makes perfect sense that if we're doing an IPE with social work, that someone from social work should be helping to make that an authentic experience for all students, that we should not be writing that portion of it. We can certainly take that first stab at it and then move it toward a committee of all of the interprofessionals involved in that simulation. Question 3 addresses the potential barriers to the IPE. And they talk about providing support, including recognition and time, educators to participate in designing, conducting, and debriefing these simulation-based activities. Again, I think that the folks who wrote the standard were looking out for those of us who simulation and would like us to be able to advance the science so that we get others to buy into this pedagogy that we're using by putting things into the standards. They talk about including financial support and time when reviewing the available resources for the IPE. It's going to be expensive using different types of supplies that are needed for the different disciplines, as well as the time that we spend pulling people away from their role, especially those of you in a healthcare setting that need to be pulled away from their actual job duty. Then they suggest under criterion 3 as well, have some IPE champions and stakeholders throughout the entire process of developing a plan and implementing that can help bring it along, because we all know that buy-in is a major challenge with some of these things that we're trying to do. So have those key stakeholders, champions that can help move it along with you is always great. The current standard includes to develop the evaluation in consultation, again, with the experts. It includes researchers and such folks as statisticians and psychometricians. because we want to measure how that SIM IPE impacts individual as well as the team and the behavior of those folks. In the previous standard, they didn't really talk about the individual and team behavior. They talked about how it impacted the individual and a team, but those particular behaviors, which we all know with communication, the communication aspects are how we respond is how we're treated on the other end as well. So I think that's a wonderful addition to the IPE standard as well. Simulation glossary standard, basically, previously there was a terminology standard. They've just changed it now to a glossary standard. I looked just back and forth, looks like quite a large number of the terms that were in the terminology section are still in the glossary section as well. And on the glossary standard, I was wondering why they just chose to name it differently, is that they also said the definitions in the Anaxel simulation glossary correspond to the Anaxel standards of best practice simulation and are designed to explain the meaning of terms in the standards. So I guess that's the reason behind changing to a glossary from a terminology.
Example, when I was looking at the evaluation standard back to the glossary and had to look, what do they mean by evaluation?
Right.
So it is very helpful.
Yeah, I don't know if you looked or not. I did not, and I happened to just think about it for when we're talking about that the piece for the facilitator. When we're talking about that, did they put anything in there about what is considered a mentor? How much do they need to know before they give it to you? What are those specific formal classes? Are those the CERT classes that are found on the SSH website? What are they talking about? And I didn't notice that those were in there. I guess I didn't look very hard either, though. But something to consider.
Yeah, I looked that hard, but I had scanned it and nothing like that caught my eye. But that's a really good question. Good point. That. To the Anaxel on their website, Anaxel stresses that this is a living document and continued to be reviewed and updated. So maybe that's a suggestion as they go on.
Yeah, great idea.
Those people work so hard on those committees. They really put a lot of time and effort. It was unbelievable to hear what they did when they were revising these standards. So kudos.
Yeah, exactly. And they had wonderful additions, I thought, and helping us to get some buy-in from our administrators and things too, which was very nice. We have something to back us. All right. Yeah. So this part, we've gone through the standards and just tried to help you out so you wouldn't have to spend a ton of time on those and you would quickly know what changes they've made. Certainly still review them when you get a chance. We thought that we would do a little bit of application now, so chose to have with you our mannequin mailbag, which is where, as you see on many of the sites, people call in or chat in for questions or comments and helpful tips that they have. So Rose and I are going to perform our edition of a mannequin mailbag for you. Okay. So first letter that we got here on the mannequin mailbag. Dear mailbag, I had an issue with a fellow faculty member using debrief time to teach students how to run the IV pump. I told her that this is not what debrief is meant to consist of. How to help her understand the benefits of debriefing, when correctly, of course. Signed, Frustrated Faculty. Response. Administrative faculty. Now, the NACSL standards of best practice simulation debriefing from the 2016 version reflect is the conscious consideration of the meaning and implication of an action, which includes the assimilation of knowledge, skills, and attitudes with pre-existing knowledge, which can lead to new interpretations by the participants. Active reframing is essential to their learning. Participants' reflection on personal and contextual factors that impacted decision-making, such as past experience, culture, background, personality, skills, and knowledge. Our process for debriefing, including the expectation that the participants will drive the discussion as they quickly analyze their own performance and provide input in others' performance. New content is not done in debriefing. Signed, Mannequin Mailbag.
Okay, that in English.
from the standard, Rose.
As we were talking about this before, I know that it's just to remember it's about we're teaching them new things. We might be helping them learn to think differently, as I think of reframing what they know. So that really is about what happened in that simulation, and what next time they're in this situation, what are they going to do the same? What are they going to do different? So it would be those participants driving the discussion, and again, not the facilitator doing all the talking.
So what happens during that simulation when the student does not know how to use that the equipment? What does the facilitator do during that?
Well,
can you go back to the previous slide?
I'll tell you what we do at Minnesota State. When we begin the scenario, one of the things we do, depending upon the level of the student, especially if they're a beginner student and they have only seen, for instance, the IV pump when it medication administration the first semester, later in the first semester, they don't remember because they've never seen it again since then, we tell them to attempt to work the pump or attempt to work the Pyxis for their medication administration. And if you continually are having trouble, don't fret. You can pick up the phone and call for an IV tech or a pharmacy tech. And those types of people will come in and help you with the pump or the Pyxis. That is one who is there for setup and takedown. We play the role of the tech, and so just get them unstuck at that point so that it does not become the focus of simulation, but that they continue to learn about it and move forward, because now she's gotten them unstuck, but they also watched at the time how to get it moving. So it seems to have helped us really, as well as we give them 5 minutes at the beginning to peruse the room and make sure they're aware of all the things in the room.
Interesting the way that you explain that, because in the real world, we need to ask for help when we are confronted with equipment that we're not sure how to work. So thank you.
Correct. I was saying here is that the debrief is for previous knowledge that you had, and how does it play into what you just did? Not, well, I heard of Alzheimer's. Explain to me what Alzheimer's is and what kinds of symptoms there are and how do we fix it. And it's not the time for that. That should have been covered prior to, and then the student brings out their understanding of it, and we may just clarify at that point, but it's not a time to go over entirely all of those different components at a debrief time. On that one, is everybody okay?
I hope to go better for frustrated faculty.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. Next letter to Mannequin Mailbag is Dear Mailbag. I run a simulation for an hour, and whatever happens, happens. A faculty member told me this is wrong. Who is right? Send fancy facilitator. Facilitator. This is a good question. People like to be creative with simulation and do simulations on the fly. Ask yourself, what is the purpose of the simulation? Clear outcomes and objectives. According to NACSL standards of best practice, simulation design 2016. This should be structured based on the purpose, theory, and modality. There should be a beginning, middle, and end. Signed, Mannequin Mailbag. Goes back to what Mannequin Mailbag did is related everything back to the standards. So finding you're not sure what to do, having a conflict with somebody, go back to the standard, see what the standard says. So my question would be to facilitator is, an hour seems like a long time for the action part of a simulation. So what's the true purpose? Is it just see what happens at time for your objectives to be completed, which it could be if it's a complex simulation, multiple patient simulation, of developing that sim, of having that structure versus the on the fly, of having a conversation with somebody, giving a presentation. So to learn something, the presentation's straightforward, there's clear objectives. If I'm having a conversation with somebody, it could go multiple ways. We not stay on the same subject. And simulation should be more about a presentation than conversation. We have specific objectives. We meet. There should be, again, a clear beginning, middle, and end. And this is covered in the simulation design, but in outcomes and objectives standard, it also speaks to a reasonable time frame to meet objectives. So objectives are going to should drive the timing of the simulation.
Questions now. What's there between outcomes and objectives? You mentioned that earlier. Objectives are, but what about the outcomes?
And that question was going to happen, and I hate that question. And we have spent, as a faculty, hours debating this. So when you look at the standard, and I'm looking for my standard, the standard talks about outcomes being the broader goals. It talks about return of investment, meeting the outcomes of the college or the institution you're working for, tying it back to those outcomes, tying it back to your course objectives, things like that. So it's kind of a broader, broader goal. So I was thinking about this when it talked about return investments. So a return of investment would be, an outcome would be to, I would say, clarify or prove your return of investment. And your objective within the simulation might be something about decreasing med errors and lead to a great return of investment. So you're investing in the simulation. The objective of the simulation is to decrease med errors, and so the broader institution, broader outcome is going to be to have a greater return of investment, having simulation to decrease med errors.
Got another example of that. I had a school that was talking about retaining students and developed a simulation program, and they are finding that because of that, their retention of their students is higher. So that actually be like a program outcome. Has simulation affected your program outcomes of completion in your program, or has it helped in your NCLEX pass rate or things like that? A before and an after.
Right. Yeah.
They actually have in of course the terminology or glossary. They have that statement. So Rose is exactly right. The statement is, or the objective is, a specific measurable result that they are expected to achieve during that experience. An outcome is the actual measurable result that the participants move toward meeting a set of objectives. So expected outcomes are usually like a change in a knowledge or a skill or attitude as a result of what happens in their sim. So the overarching one over the smaller.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question then as we're looking at that. It says at the beginning there should be a beginning, middle, and end. And the person talked about it was an hour in length. What are your recommended lengths for a simulation, for the debriefing? What's kind of normal out there?
I mean, to say this, but it depends. It does go back to what are your objectives. So I can give you an example of a typical simulation for me. When I do it, is I do a half-hour pre-brief, a half-hour action, and a half-hour debrief. And a lot of what we cover in our debrief, others cover, or in our pre-brief, others cover in our debrief. So that typical simulation with 5 participants. And I just did our triage sim with our graduating students, where we had up to at least 8 students, and it was 10 patients, and it took 3 hours, and our brief was 20 minutes. The action was an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes, and that's the time was we had a good 50 minutes of debriefing, if not an hour. So it for it just depends on what's the objective and what you have to achieve.
That's a good point. I think that the other thing that happens is that depending upon the developmental level of your student, you may have a first semester student and have 2 objectives, and it takes them 40 minutes to meet those objectives. That long it needs to go to meet that objective, and so the learning is there for them. And sometimes some other students may take 20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what do you do in that situation when you're under a time crunch for getting students through? Do you set time for your actual action of the simulation, and once that time is done, it's just done?
Done. Yes. Well, darn it, it depends on how close they are to meeting that objective. But it goes back to playing that simulation design and really taking time. And Colleen will talk about this later, really taking time to plan sim. So you can't plan it. If you're an experienced nurse working with new grads or students, or maybe somebody just new to your area, you can't plan that time as it would take you to accomplish the objectives. So always double or triple the time. So I'll walk through it, and then I'll double or triple or more of the time to me to give that to the student. So if it takes me 10 minutes to do something, I'll usually give, especially beginning students, at 30 minutes to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Colleen?
No, that's exactly right. It's one of those, as we tell nursing students, nursing is not just black or white. It's gray. So oftentimes simulation is the same way. There are many things to consider. And if you've done your plan stage as well as you can, I think you'll think about those times and the pre-brief and the brief and how long each of that level is. Because one of the things you do when you're in the planning stage is that you choose level of student, speaking from the academic world, that you want to have in that simulation. So your objectives are based on the developmental level of your student. So you're not going to put a first semester student in a multi-patient prioritization. So your objectives will be easier to reach for that first semester student. Hence, you know that at the time it's going to be, a little shorter, hopefully.
Yes. And I think at that point, if you're running out of time, then again, that's where your debriefing is so important. Hearing, why didn't, what happened, what worked, what didn't. So that's when they did perform as you thought. It's just been the group, because sometimes that happens, but then that comes out in debriefing.
Do you agree, Rose, that you have to kind of look at the two evils and decide? So you may not,
Yes.
They've taken so long, they've not really gotten to their objective, and I don't think I can get them there anymore. And so at that point, we need to call it and move to debrief, and then that would be some of our discussion in there that, what may have happened as we move forward in the reflection. That's another option, because debrief is so important.
Yeah. And I mean, I think both us, just one sim a day. I've got 3 or 4 lined up to go back to back, so I can't just run until they're done.
Right.
Oh, fancy facilitator again.
Poor person.
It is. I mean, for those of you new and those of you not new can attest to this. It's really hard. It is really hard to do a good sim. It takes a lot of time to get there, but the NACSL standards here, there are tons of resources out there that we didn't have starting off. So use those resources to do what you can. We'll do our next one, Gmail bag. Kind of going back to what we talked about, sometimes participants get stuck. Do I let them try to figure things out no matter how long it takes? Stop the simulation and help them out. Sincerely, Sue Fieldhouse Cookie.
Thank you.
It's a relative.
You knew I was going to ask that, didn't you?
Exactly. Dear Sue Fieldhouse Cookie, the first thing to ask yourself are, why are the participants getting stuck? Are they unfamiliar with the content? Are they unfamiliar with the equipment or resources? Are they not picking up on concerning data? Are they so overwhelmed they can't move? Standards includes criterion that addresses pre-briefing and the delivery of cues. The participants were given appropriate prep materials, time to know the environment. If they, the facilitator may need to give them a cue so they can move ahead. Cue planned or unplanned. They should help direct the participant to move the simulation forward. Pilot testing, as recommended by the Simulation Design Standard, may be work on kinks. Mailbag. What we talked about previously too is to make sure they understand how to get help, how to ask questions. Some of the cues could be that you have lab call them with a lab result or hand lab results in. I've had the provider call in and say that they saw a certain lab result if students weren't picking things up. So again, the first part is, why are they getting stuck? Were the prep not good enough? Are you throwing new information at them? Are they not taking the time to get to know the environment? But, kind of have a few things what could go wrong, and then work to solve those problems if you get to pilot testing. But always there's other things that students ask or look at or think about that you see as a facilitator, you thought about everything and come up with this thing from left field, and you're trying to scramble to get them back in the game.
Exactly. I have a family member in my simulation, but I don't know how to prepare them for the role. Can you make me? Dan Baumgarter. Dear Dan Baumgarter, in Criterion 4 of the Facilitation Standards, it describes delivering cues using a variety of methods, and that can include comments from the patient or a family member. A standardized actor can be used to provide cues to manage those unexpected events. In family member to remain in their role and react as though the patient is truly their family member. Can cue card for your family member to help guide them through key areas of simulation focused on learning outcomes. Mannequin mailbag. So for those of you who don't know about Minnesota State University Mankato, nursing program is based on teaching our students family nursing and societal nursing. So we actually have one course per semester that focuses primarily on the family and society. And so we teach a lot of other institutions how to incorporate family nursing and family components into their simulation. So we do this on a regular basis. There are a lot of different opportunities for you to incorporate family into it, and that's kind of another webinar. But in the question part, if there's some questions you have that you may be already doing also that I can help you with, I certainly will do that. Yeah. Share with you just especially if you're a novice simulation person, a model that we developed at Minnesota State University Mankato several years ago when we were fairly new and wanted something to tell us what are the steps that we do, how do we not miss it, what we found ourselves doing, it's a backward design on everything we did, and it was very frustrating because we didn't know what we didn't know. So what we wanted was for somebody to give us a checklist on how we create the simulation as well as run it to make sure that our learners had the best experience possible and the most authentic. What we created at that time is this model. It is not a theory-based model. It is more of a template or kind of a checklist for you to follow to make sure that you have all your components when you're working on a simulation. And as we mentioned earlier, stage is the most important. If you skimp the planning stage, you will be sorry later on those other stages, because you will need to go backwards to, especially when you're piloting, to make alterations. So that is to spend a lot of time on that planning stage. We came up with this because, as I mentioned, we are a family-focused care teachers, educators here. So it stands for the Simulated Educational Experiences Model. We developed it here as faculty to help our nursing students develop a family-focused care approach during simulations. This model will assist a novice or an expert educator with the operational aspects of your simulations, but it also encourages you to use family-focused experience. See this basically as a model that will guide you to help create a thought-out simulation. The reason we came up with C as the acronym for it is because at the time we were going to the National League for Nursing to accept an award, a Hearst Award for excellence in geriatric education that we were awarded for our work with the ACEs cases. And we were trying to come up with something to help other faculty working on simulations to help our students see family. So talk about think family, teaching thinking family. This is seeing family. So in every stage we have components that we use to bring about family focus. So our students are continuously focused on the patient and the family members. What do I need to do to help family as well so that that patient then can improve their health? So we would share this. I just did a webinar for the International Family Nursing Association where I just talked about the C model, and so that was an hour presentation about the model itself. So it's quite extensive, but we just want to share it here with you to help you as you are facilitating your simulation experiences at your organization or academic world.
Just one question on that before were you going to say more on that?
Nope.
Okay, so as I'm looking at that, I get the planning stage, and get the
Okay.
pre-briefing stage. The debriefing and briefing, and then participation stage. I haven't really heard any difference. I've heard a pre-briefing, but not a brief stage. I guess the participation stage is when you're going to do actually your facilitation of the simulation. Then you debrief afterwards. So if you could just kind of briefly tell us what a briefing stage is, the evaluating stage, and radiation stage. Those are three I haven't heard of before.
Well, when we started talking about this, one of the things that we had seen was like Jeffrey's model, which helps you to begin to create your simulations. And as new faculty in simulation, I just felt like there was so much missing in that I had to think about before I could roll any of these things out. We decided to divide up the pre-briefing stage from the briefing. So the briefing is where the educator presents the specifics of the simulation experience. The students are exposed to the necessary content. So you've already started it in your classroom versus, before they actually even come to the simulation. Them content, talking about the family component, those kinds of things. They're given kind of directions about how a simulation would move forward. The students ask questions and clarify things, ask for additional resources, sort of before they get there. Then we're always paying careful attention to make sure that we have that family component in all of these aspects as well. When they get there is more of the briefing. So video prior to every simulation that encourages students to take simulation seriously, to focus on family. The one we're currently using now is I'll get the model wrong. It's a car scenario where it's a simulation of a test, putting test dummies into a car. I want to say it's Acura. And the man carefully lifts the person into the car, and they are human beings at that point, and there's 2 children, a mom, and the husband. And so as you watch the man's face, motions that he has in placing the family gingerly into the car, and you realize toward the end that it is that man's family that he's been placing in the car for the test run of this car in the crash cycle. As they're zooming toward crash, you then see the mannequins in the car. They are no longer at that point the family, but they are showing it. So the man is considering, and at the very end it says, imagine what you could learn when they're considered more than dummies. So it's empowering. And so the types of things we show to our students, we also show a Monsters, Inc. little ditty, from the Listed series, we have a fun little thing about what simulation is not, so the participants can see that, it could be very punitive, and it's not. In the briefing itself, we kind of consider that like a map of the simulation experience. Students are assigned their roles there of primary nurse, secondary nurse, charge nurse, family member, that kind of thing. We have a member in every simulation. We have cue cards for family members only to kind of guide them through the simulation. Then we explain to the student who's playing family role, see if they have any questions, explain it's important to stay in your role kind of thing throughout. Participation stage, participating in the actual simulation. The observers are in a live feed room, or many of you that don't have live feed rooms would have them in either the control room or in an area around in that room that are watching as well. A briefing stage you mentioned you were aware of. The evaluation stage, as I mentioned, we have the students who are observing in another room. We want them to be engaged. So we give them, it's called a peer observation evaluation form, and it has things like who emerged as the leader, how did you feel about how the family member was cared for, did the students introduce themselves to the family, questions like that to help them do a simple evaluation, but more of a formative, because they're going to just share that reflection with all the students who participated as well as the ones who observed when they all get into the debrief. We'll have evaluation at that point where we may do like a pre and a post questionnaire, where if it's knowledge or satisfaction, you know, some of the oldies but goodies that people are getting away from a little bit more on testing now is satisfaction and confidence levels. There are some other things, a number of things that we're looking at as well to do for evaluation, such leveling, checking the level of the student's competency or measuring their transition to practice or transfer to care. The important thing that if anybody has any ideas how to do that, contact me. We'd love to do a multi-site study on that. That's one of the things we're looking at next. Remediation phase is just where we look at where weaknesses were. It sometimes is included within the debrief, but doesn't have to stop there. It can continue for weeks or months. We might give them another simulated experience to advance their knowledge about what they were weak on in this one. We give them maybe clinical experiences that they go to, or a directed lecture based on the content that they still need, individual mentoring with students from some of the faculty, or we've also used like a reflective journaling, trying to get them up to speed on things that maybe we thought or they thought that they were lacking, or that they reflected that they'd like to do a little differently. So does that help what those stages are?
Yeah, it explains that very well. Thank you. I do have one other question, and you mentioned those in that briefing stage where you've got some videos. Are these open source videos that we can get the links to, or are they something that you have developed yourself?
Exactly. They are on, most of them are on YouTube. If you just put, I think it's the ACRA safety crash video, and you'll find it there. Monsters Inc. is Monsters Inc., and if you put in simulation as well, there's about a 4-minute little video that shows all the fellows from Monsters Inc. And it's kind of where the little boy is lying in his bed, and at the end you can see he's not actually a little boy, it's a simulation. That's one. And then Lifted, if you put, it's a Pixar Lifted. That's one. There's a kind of a spaceship, and they're up, and they're having tons of different little tabs that they have to run to pull the spaceship up, and the man that's in the bedroom down below in a house up to the spaceship. So it's, you know, it's quite entertaining. I know I've been doing this for so many years, and one of the faculty just told me before my last webinar that I gave that she really has never liked the funny ones, that she actually liked the one from the act dealer. So it's moving, but I think it requires a little bit of preempting for students, so that when you watch it, you feel for the family. And if you don't begin by telling them a few things that to look for, I think it could be scary that they may think that the family actually crashes. It's good.
I'm wondering if you would give us those, if you would send you would send those to me, and any type of a little information about each one. We could put them up right on our MnSHEP website, so people could easily access those if they would like them.
Okay. Yeah, I do that. No problem.
Okay.
That one, Rose.
to our reference page. We got our fun pictures from Google Pictures. And then there's the reference for the NAACL standards. A site that you can find. The standards are free to everybody. You can download them as a PDF. Separately, so each of the standards you download separately, but those are free if you want to order the published magazine, you would call it, from Elsevier. I think it's $10 a piece, but you can do that from the site as well. But they are available to the public for free. If you go on their website, they are having a webinar on the new standards. Today I have a faculty meeting, I know, so I couldn't go. I think it's the 9th. Or maybe it is the 23rd, January. So well, that is, it's limited to 100 people, but that's another resource people could go. But they worked hard to create and raise these standards, and they are free to the public. Any questions?
And wondering if you would just put any questions you have up into the chat box. If people are doing that, I'm going to go back up to our website because I want to show you a couple resources. So if you're thinking of any type of question you may have, this would be the time. I put up our website a direct link here to the standards of best practice from NAACL.
Great.
So here they are right here. And if you go over to our, let me go back to our Health Force Minnesota website. And I'll show you where that link is. I'll also show you where you can get the survey for today's presentation. So once again, and simulation. And when you go to our simulation page, instead of logging into MnSHEP, just go on the page and you will see the NAACL website right here. And those updated standards, I just put a link in there so you can go ahead and have a direct link to those standards if you would like. The things I'd like to show you that we discussed and that we have some different information. Remember, the password is simulation with a capital S. And if you go into the resources tab, the second one down, you'll find here the confidentiality agreement template. Here, there's also one that's called expectations, confidentiality, and simulation template. I do not actually have a policy for simulation. I thought there was, but there is not up there. So that you're aware, we've got information up here. Other thing I wanted to show you is when you go into these newsletters and webinars, and down to today's webinar, we've got the handout from today. But at the very end of the connection for the webinar, I will be putting up the so you'll be able to listen to this. It'll be archived. And you can get a certificate for continuing education hours. You just take this survey here, and it's just one click. There's 3 questions, and I have a link here to the certificate for you. So trying to make it as easy as you can, and then you can just download that for your own resources. I'd like to mention to you is that mention the ACEs cases and the award that they received for their work on that. We're right now on our winter newsletter, and we will be showcasing the ACEs cases brand new book that has just been published. And there we have 3 different chapters from people in Minnesota. 2 of those chapters are from faculty at Mankato State University, and the other chapter is from multiple or instructors from multiple universities within the Minnesota college system and universities. So I just want you to know that that's coming out as well. And finally, that those resources for those those videos I'll put on the resource page for the Health Force Minnesota. Any questions? And I just really want to thank Pauline and Rose for their and for all participants who've attended this. We just really thank you for your time and your dedication to simulation, and we'll let you know when the next webinars are. We're planning for 2 in the spring. I don't have the dates yet. Thank you very much. And for those, Rose and Pauline, if you'll stay on the line, and otherwise, everyone else is dismissed. Thank you very much.
Happy days.
Thank you.